Welcome to Politicals 254. Here we talk about law, power and politics. So today we will be debunking the Singapore dream, where we peel back the layers of one of Kenya's most talked about visions. We are diving into President William Ruto's bold promise to turn Kenya into the quote-unquote Singapore of Africa. If you've been following the news or scrolling through social media lately, you know that this idea has exploded into the national conversation. From late 2025 right up to now, the president and his allies have been chanting it like a mantra at rallies and in speeches.
There is no reason why we cannot catch up with Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea. There is no reason.
Ati wanapingana na mimi. Ati wanasema ile safari ya kupeleka Kenya first world ati haiwezekani. Mimi nataka niwaeleze wale majamaa.
Ruto paints a picture of a prosperous Kenya with gleaming infrastructure, zero corruption and opportunities for all, inspired by Singapore's rise from a struggling port city to a global powerhouse. The Singapore dream, however, is not a new obsession. Way back in the 1980s, President Daniel Arap Moi was already admiring Singapore's model during talks with the US President Jimmy Carter, seeing it as a blueprint for Kenya's development. Fast forward to 2019 and Uhuru Kenyatta echoed the same sentiments during his visit to Singapore, tying it to Vision 2030.
There is no reason why this republic of ours should not be where Singapore and the Asian tigers are. There is nothing that is supposed to be done that does not exist in one shelf or another in our Kenyan archives.
Now, Ruto has revived it, promising a 5 trillion shilling roadmap focused on education, tech, and investment. Sounds inspiring, doesn't it? A nation hustling towards first world status. But is it realistic, or is this just another shiny narrative? In this episode, we'll debunk the dream step by step. We'll uncover the real story behind Singapore's success, exploit its economy, and then hold up a mirror to Kenya, highlighting the initiatives that ape Singapore while exposing ironies like rampant corruption and scandals rocking the government. Let's travel back to the tiny island nation at the tip of Southeast Asia. Singapore's prime location with major shipping routes in the Strait of Malacca has always been its golden ticket. It is the world's second busiest port by container volume and fast for transshipment, making it a natural hub for trade, tourism, and even as an airport connector for the region. But location alone did not build Singapore. It was grit and governance. Enter Lee Kuan Yew, the founding father. In 1959, his People's Action Party swept into power during self-governance under British rule. Then came the big shake-up. In 1965, Singapore separated from Malaysia amid political tensions, thrusting it into independence as a vulnerable, resource-poor state. No oil, no farmland, just people and a port. Lee Kuan Yew faced riots, unemployment, and ethnic divide, but he turned crisis into opportunity with iron-fisted leadership. Now, corruption was rampant in colonial times, but Lee saw it as a cancer that would doom the young generation. He declared zero tolerance, beefing up the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau, established in 1952, and passing the Prevention of Corruption Act in 1960.
An efficient and a strong anti-corruption unit under the President, with powers to investigate any person, however high up, and to carry it to a successful prosecution, will work wonders. The laws against corruption should be tightened to shift the onus of proof onto the person who possesses more assets than his income can justify. That's the law we have in Singapore.
This law hit hard. It had broad definitions of graft, presumption of guilt for unexplained wealth, and harsh penalties like jail, fines, and asset seizures. No one was spared, not even top government officials. Take Wee Tun Boon, for example, in 1975. He was a minister convicted of corruption involving over 800,000 Singapore dollars. He was sentenced to prison. In 1979, a parliamentarian fled the country after embezzling union funds, only to surrender decades later. In 1986, a minister took his own life amid a bribery probe worth $1 million. Now, these cases sent a clear message. Corruption isn't tolerated, period. Today, Singapore ranks third globally on transparency, a far cry from its shady past. Lee Kuan Yew's stance was that integrity was key to survival. Building trust for investment and growth. But it came with a cost. Critics called it authoritarian with strict laws and limited freedoms. However, the government enjoyed massive support from the people. Now let's talk about money. Lee Kuan Yew knew Singapore lacked natural resources, so he bet on people as the ultimate asset. Early on, he tackled housing chaos. You see, there were slums everywhere, and so in response, the government passed the Land Acquisition Act to seize land cheaply and build public flats. They relocated people from shacks to high-rises, sometimes forcefully, as Ruto himself noted in a recent speech. Today, nearly 80% of residents live in these affordable units, funded partly by the Central Provident Fund, a mandatory savings scheme where workers contribute up to 20% of their wages, usable for homes, health, education, and retirement. To attract cash, Lee fought corruption to facilitate business activities, with Singapore still topping charts for the ease of doing business. They lured multinationals into manufacturing, starting with low-skilled jobs in the 1970s, like textiles, then pivoting to high-tech by the 1990s. I'm talking about semiconductors, biotechnology, and aerospace. Manufacturing now makes up about 20% of their GDP, with semiconductors as their top export. The National Wages Council, set up in 1975, kept labor, business, and trade unions in harmony, tying wage hikes to labor productivity. The 1980s brought in sovereign wealth funds. Now, this refers to a pool of money that the country can deploy to provide pension, income investment, and infrastructure. Singapore has two sovereign wealth funds, that is GIC and Temasek, now holding over $1.2 trillion, investing their export earnings, for instance, from refined oil into global assets. Yes, despite not having oil, they operate one of the largest oil refineries in the region. Now, this buffers the economy. They have a net zero debt. Now, yes, while the country borrows, it is illegal for the government to borrow for consumption. It is only allowed to borrow for investment. This has earned them a AAA credit rating. They have also used their income to invest heavily in education, training their population with technical skills required in their industries and those required by multinational organizations operating in Singapore. It is important to note that Singapore's small size, a city-state with under 6 million people, allowed tight control, merit-based governance, and quick decision-making. Strong political goodwill turned policies into reality. But replicating this elsewhere is tough, especially in larger countries like Kenya with diverse populations and entrenched issues. Now, Singapore, like any other country, has its problems. I'm talking about inequality, high living costs, and a low birth rate. Back home, Ruto's administration is clearly inspired. Take affordable housing, for instance, which is a levy on salaries which aims to build public housing units, mimicking Singapore's model. There's also talk of a national infrastructure fund to mobilize trillions without heavy borrowing. Now, this sounds excellent on paper, but here's the irony that shatters the dream. While Ruto preaches zero corruption like Lee Kuan Yew, scandals are piling up under his watch. In 2025 alone, we saw billions vanish. I'm talking about 6.6 billion in edible oil imports, 3.5 billion in fake fertilizer, 3.7 billion in dodgy mosquito nets, and 24 billion in health insurance fraud, among several other scandals. Kenya's corruption score is a lowly 32 out of 100, which is worlds apart from Singapore's 84. Former CJ David Maraga called the Singapore talk misleading and dangerous, pointing to missing foundations like the rule of law. Now, the question remains, how can we build a Singapore when graft is the order of the day?
By the way, CS, in any civilized society, if a headline like this was screaming out there, the health CS would have resigned. In China, you would be in jail today. Why? Because the buck stops with you.
Finally, let's zoom out. Ruto's Singapore dream is not his first big pitch. Remember the Hustler Nation and bottom-up agenda that got him elected in 2022? The one that focused on empowering Mama Mboga and Boda guys through funds and opportunities? Well, we all know how that went. Now, with the 2027 elections looming, this new vision feels like a sequel. Bold, aspirational, but light in details. Critics argue that it's election bait, promises of the moon to distract the masses from debt, inequality, and youth unrest. As one governance expert put it, we can believe in the dream but can't copy every step. Kenya's size, diversity, and politics demands a tailored approach. While Singapore is a good point of reference, the first beast that they slayed was that of corruption, a monster that is alive and well in Kenya today.